Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of the Lines in Wax Discography Retrospective series. Today I want to talk about one of the most extreme metal bands to ever exist. These guys started as a one-man speedcore project but evolved into one of the most brutal and punishing outfits to ever walk the planet. Mixing gabba techno with grindcore and death metal, these Aussie madmen pushed the envelope of what could be considered music before fledging more fully into one of the more interesting death metal bands of the first decade of the new millennium. I am of course talking about the infamous Australian powerhouse known as The Berzerker. The Berzerker was a project that formed in 1995 by renowned speedcore DJ Luke Kenny, also known as Kenny G or DJ Devious a bit later on. Before there was even a sniff of metal or grindcore influence to the music, the Berzerker initially focused entirely in the realms of hardcore dance or gabba techno, whatever you want to call it. Metal didn't really creep into the sound initially until Luke, as the Berzerker did a speedcore version of Deicide's Once Upon the Cross for one of his EPs, and off the back of that impressed Reawakening Records enough for them to then commission him to remix some Morbid Angel tracks for one of their crappy compilation albums in 1998. If you're familiar with Reawakening Records at all, then this compilation record was part of what I like to call their identity crisis in the mid to late 90s, where after riding high on the success of both grindcore and then death metal, and after dabbling with the majors in the form of a deal with Columbia, like a true junkie, Reawakening was looking for the next big underground genre to take off. This had them looking under many rocks, and is an interesting tangent in all in of itself actually, but a lot of focus was on the rave scenes, on breakbeat, hardcore dance and other underground genres of electronic music. There's a pile of absolutely shocking Reawakening catalogue stuff from this era, and they even started a sub-label to test the waters. I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, I'm losing my thread here. So after being commissioned to do these Morbid Angel remixes for Reawakening in a hardcore dance like techno style, the Berzerker was signed to the label and the seed was planted to take the Berzerker in a much more extreme metal direction, but as always, I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's rein it back in here. As the Berzerker's list of studio albums is fairly short and these discography videos are usually fairly long, let's take some time to start right at the beginning and take a look at some of the speedcore EPs that Luke produced under the Berzerker moniker before forming an actual band. Now, I need to warn you, I'm no dance music scholar, so some of my terminology might be a bit off. Now, despite the extremity that Luke Kenny is known for, his earlier output, to me at least, seems more in line with folks like, I don't know, Lenny D or less commercial sounding Neophyte. The early Berzerker stuff to me is more in common with this whole Dutch gabba scene than it does more with extreme artists like, I don't know, Delta 9, that kind of stuff. You know, in fact, there's a ton of super extreme speedcore stuff out there online, but it doesn't really seem to fit in all that well with the Berzerker. What I'm saying, this is way above my head, I'll be honest, but I'd heavily recommend checking out Legs Akimbo Records. I might be a few years out of date with my info because, as I say, this isn't really my scene, but Legs Akimbo is home to some absolutely mental shit, like Nut or NUH, I'm not sure what the name of the artist is, Press Terror, Screamer Claws, and other super extreme speedcore or splittercore artists. If you wonder what splittercore is, just Google it. It's absolutely mental. Anyway, back to the Berzerker.
Aren't you gonna sing us a pretty little song? No.
To my knowledge, this 12-inch called No in 1996 is where it all kind of began for the Berzerker. At least it was the first thing that got put out on a physical format. It heavily predates the grinding mush of the Reawakening days, as I've said, but this record is pure speedcore Armageddon, and I have to admit that Luke Kenny has some serious chops in that department. I'm not a scholar of this stuff, but it sounds fucking good to me. So yeah, some of the sampling is a bit silly, but this isn't a genre that takes itself too seriously after all. The beats, however, are sick as fuck and absolutely pumping, top-notch stuff. There are even a few sampled guitars in here at some point, hinting at the carnage that would come a little bit later on. Archie Campbell is an oddly titled earlier offering from the Berzerker. Again, back when the project was a one-man with a penchant for gabba techno. It appears to be available online only, and it was never released on a physical format to my knowledge. There's also conflicting information as to when this was actually recorded, so it may have come out before No, and I should have done these two the other way around, but never mind. It's a puzzling release. If your experience lies with a full band death metal berserker that we will get to, what we have on display here is instead head-splitting hardcore gabba techno, which can be just what the doctor ordered, or possibly not. Either way, Luke himself has said that he thinks this is one of the best things that he's done. So if you're into gabba or speedcore, I would definitely give Archie Campbell a go. Out of all of this early stuff, this is probably the one you should check out. Anyway, moving on to 1998. Inextricable Zenith, what a title, is a notable early entry into the evolution of the Berzerker because it was on this EP that the cover version, or remix rather, or whatever, of Deicide's Once Upon the Cross first appeared. It starts to make more sense upon hearing this and the EP in general, which is super aggressive, as to how the Berzerker migrated from being a gabba project into a grindcore band. If I had one complaint though about Inextricable Zenith, the EP, a lot of the tracks seem like they're just a little bit too long, especially when they veer over the 5-minute mark. It just seems a bit unnecessary for something that is literally grinding your head into mush. But hey, like I said, speedcore isn't really my thing, and it could just be my personal tolerance in regards to this kind of thing wearing off. So I'm not including it as part of the discography, but as it's a compilation of various artists, but as I mentioned in the intro to this video, Uric commissioned the Berzerker to remix 2 Morbid Angel tracks for their Hellspawn CD, where extreme metal meets extreme techno. Anyway, it's like Dave Vincent somehow rediscovered this CD in 2010 and then decided to make a whole album based off of it, and we know how that went, so yeah. Anyway, this shebang resulted in the Berzerker being signed to Uric, and the work on the first proper full-length began. Kind of. Again, this doesn't quite qualify as a canonical entry, but there was a Demos 1998 session recorded. I believe this is like the initial demos of the Berzerker self-titled that Luke wanted to work on, and that whole journey, which we'll get into now. But this was eventually pressed onto a CD for promotional purposes, I'm not really sure, by Uric in the year 2000. So I'm popping it in here, but it's not really part of the canonical discography However, before the finished product, if you could call it that, and what a journey this will be, of the grindcore Berzerker self-titled, and before it could hit the world, we'll get into all of this cool shit in a minute, there was one more speedcore released to drop in the year 2000, and that is, it's conflicting information, but Discogs has it listed as an Untitled EP. So it's got more of that kind of speedcore stuff that the Berzerker was known for in the early days. It doesn't really offer to me anything new in regards to like what was already being heard on No, on, you know, Inextricable Zenith. I probably said that wrong, but you know, it's more that kind of stuff. So if that's your bag, check it out, but it's in no way a completionist item, and it can be skipped if you're not so inclined into this kind of shit. So let's take a look at what came afterwards.
I know what I have witnessed. Now it is your turn.
So this has already been quite the journey so far, right? We haven't even got to the first album yet. But I promise we are finally at that point. This next record I'm going to talk about is when everything changed for the Berzerker. In fact, for most people, canonically, this is where the Berzerker actually begins. It makes the point from when the project crawled out of the bedroom and onto the live stages around the world.
As I'm sitting there with a severed head in my hand, talking to it, or looking at it, and I'm about to go crazy.
When the Berzerker signed with Uric, Luke originally wanted the project to be produced in Canada by Devin Townsend, as well as members of Strapping Young Lad who would help with bass guitar and vocals. However, this was not to be, and Luke actually went to Canada to record with these guys, and with Devin Townsend, and this all kind of fell to shit. It began what was a 2-year monumental task where Luke fought seemingly a never-ending uphill battle to get the album made. You see, before the Berzerker became a fully fledged recording band, with the album that followed this, Dissimulate, and the tour that came before that, this project was, if footage from the band's own DVD is anything to go by, basically just one very angry Australian man shouting at his friends until they made a death metal record with hardcore gabba drumming on it. I don't really know how or why Dig from Reawakening signed Luke Kenny on the back of those fucking Morbid Angel remixes, but I'm sure as shit glad that he did. The fact that this entire band exists from that kind of stuff is just bonkers. How the Berzerker was born from that initial session is just one of those bizarre things that happens in life, I guess. So, you know, it's not bizarre that he got signed off that, as in like, oh, he's a talentless hack. What I mean is, it's bizarre that what we got, looking back now at the Berzerker being one of the most insane bands ever, what we got just came from a remix. It's nuts. We've already explored the Berzerker's existence before the self-titled, but in my opinion, he didn't really come into his own until he started making albums for Reawakening. This first output, a ramshackle collection of unfinished tunes by Luke and several musician friends, left much more of a mark than I think anybody ever expected. It's now not so secret that this album was released in an unfinished form, the band simply running out of time before the release date. Couple that with the group handling a lot more experimental and dirtier grindcore here than on any of their albums which would follow, and you have a recipe for what should have been a disaster. But in the long run, I think it's what made the Berzerker. You know, that dirty sound with the awkward mix of gabba, techno and death metal, each genre lurching over the other uncomfortably in the unfinished mixing. Reality and Forever are two of my all-time favourite songs. Burnt isn't far behind, and February just seethes absolute fucking loathing for the human race, which is just brilliant. Throw in a bunch of medical samples on the intro for Faces of Death, and hey presto, you're onto a winner, son. Who needs mixing and mastering? Who needs a finished album when it's this fucking good? Excluding the final 2 tracks, which are the shittiest excuses for harsh noise to ever be exported from Australia, the Berzerker is an absolute animal of a record, and one that lays bare the disgusting reality of human existence, filtered through a lens of someone that is just like completely fed up with life, and emphasises the all too easily forgotten looming presence of death. It is grim stuff. However, despite the ramshackle finished product, this record was an absolute task to put together, and it really is a surprise that it was ever made at all. The sheer headache that was the session for the debut album is almost nearly as legendary as the album itself in its own right, but, you know, to be honest, all of this is probably far beyond the scope of the video. I highly recommend, if this is interesting to you, checking out the DVD called The Principles and Practices of the Berzerker. Not only does it contain a brutal live set, but the band and label bravely bared all from the initial debut recording sessions. That's like all the kind of shit with Devin Townsend, right away up for the following like carnage that ensued with Luke trying to get this recorded in his own home. It might not be as dramatic as, say, Some Kind of Monster, but all the technical and musical demons you could imagine rear their heads in a very candid way. So if you're into that shit, check it out, even though it does scrape away some of the magic and the grime and the mystery of the self-titled album. One does have to wonder, though, what kind of different beast the Berzerker self-titled would have been if Devin Townsend and his hired goons had actually produced this record as intended. That's another one for the Tangent Universe pile. Anyway, like I said, 2000 self-titled saw the band hitting the ground running. Everything changed. It wasn't too long before the Berzerker leveled up and became something else entirely once more.
Death reveals to man what he really is.
Around this time, the band solidified for the first time as a functioning unit. The band adopted a series of, well, quite boring monikers, branding themselves in the media as the singer, the bassist, the guitarist, and the drummer. This was also, for me as a side note, the coolest period of the band because they also wore these insane monster masks and matching black outfits. It was an interesting look, if nothing else. So Luke Kenny, the mastermind behind the Berzerker, of course assumed the role of vocalist, whilst multi-instrumentalist genius Sam Bean, who was heavily involved in the debut, stayed on as the band's bass player. On guitar was Matt Wilcox, who some of you may know as the guitar player for the Akakoka albums Words That Go Unspoken, Deeds That Go Undone, and Antichrist. He filled the guitarist slot nicely here. Matt has been involved in a ton of stuff outside of Akakoka and the Berzerker, but this is generally what he's known for. He also played in the Antichrist Imperium with Dave Gray from Akakoka, as well as Sam Bean actually, and was in Abremelin, is that how you say it? And most recently Shotgun Mistress. Sam Bean is also, since we're on the subject of other bands, Sam Bean also played in the Senseless, which is kind of like his old solo project thing, as well as playing in a band called Werewolves. All worth checking out, all really cool shit. Anyway, rounding out this lineup, this Dissimulate album lineup, was drummer Gary Thomas, who admittedly I don't know anything about, at least off the top of my head for this video. Anyway, yeah, you heard me right there, folks. Drummer. A band that mixes speedcore and hardcore gabba with death metal and grindcore got themselves a drummer. Somewhere on the other side of the world, Agoraphobic Nosebleed's drum machine woke up in a cold sweat at this point, fearful that its days were numbered. But I digress, we'll talk more about Gary Thomas in a moment. Right now, let's have a quick goosey at something from 2002's Dissimulate. Dissimulate is a classic record in every shape and form and propelled me, personally, full on into the world of grindcore and death metal after I heard it. It could be, easily I think, a contender for one of my favourite albums of all time, but I think in my mid-teens I played this record to death. Unfortunately it was never pressed on vinyl, fucking sort it out Eureka, but the CD version will suffice. It's simple, digital as fuck in both sound and artwork, and probably is better off on a digital format anyway, actually thinking about it. If you've never heard this before, the first thing you will probably notice about Dissimulate is the drums, which pretty much render everything else irrelevant, unless you're listening on a good speaker system. Good luck in listening to 35 minutes of bass drums. Able to appreciate the full mix, and not to mention the low end, one would instead be subjected to one of the heaviest sounds known to man. The guitars are nothing but exquisite melodic carcass puppetry, as are to a degree the vocals, with its like lows and highs mixed together, but the drums are absolutely fucking mental as fuck, to put it one way. Why create, right? Why take the time and effort to intricately compose lightning fast, ultra heavy grinding death metal just to lay a whole bunch of gabba hardcore kick drums all over the fucking top of it? At the core, it's a stupid fucking idea, but man, this is the only thing that I think has crossed over these two genres and has sounded absolutely flawless. Opening song Disregard is an all-time favourite of mine, as is Principles and Practices of Embalming and Abandonment. Pure Hatred is simply fucking livid. The human drumming capability barrier is pushed to its absolute limits in Death Reveals, and also there's a cover at the end of this, Corporal Jigsaw Quandary. It knocks the socks off the Carcass original, at least in terms of speed and heaviness. And what makes the listening all the more mind-blowing is, as I said, the band employed a real human drummer on this album. Gary Thomas is an absolute fucking machine, and I implore anybody into drumming performance and who isn't too iffy about the overuse of triggers to listen to this damnable blast of grinding death metal. I mean, look at this guy. Extensive touring followed, as did the release of the previously mentioned Principles and Practices of the Berzerker DVD, but what seemed like an upward trajectory for this brutal yet interesting outfit spluttered and fell to the wayside. It would be another 3 years before Luke Kenny would reconvene the Berzerker crew to drop another album. Unfortunately for Gary Thomas, an apparent altercation with a bouncer during the band's US tour in support of Dissimulate left him unable to perform the ultra-fast blasts that he had been doing, and Dissimulate was to be his only album with the band. I don't know how much truth there actually is to that, and I'm genuinely curious as to what Gary Thomas is up to these days. If anybody knows, please let me know. Simple as that. Anyway, let's zoom forward to 2005. Touring unit for Dissimulate disintegrated. Luke ditched the masks, and he, along with Sam Bean still on bass, returned to basics for the next Berzerker record. With a drum machine and a laptop, World of Lies was born. The booklet shows the band as a 6-piece, oddly enough, highlighting all the folks who've come on board to help Luke and Sam round out this record on both guitar and bass. Interestingly, the fellow who drew the first 3 albums worth of record sleeves also appears here as if he is a fully fledged member of the band, which was unusual, but it's nice to see his contributions to the Berzerker acknowledged in such a way. However, it's definitely worth noting that it's heavily unclear who contributed what to this album, at least in what quantity. Sam Bean has more recently expressed frustration with Luke in this regard. Instead of continuing the success of the Dissimulate lineup, perhaps with a new drummer, to Sam, returning to using a revolving door of people as a studio project again seemed like the wrong move to make. And to be honest, as much as I love World of Lies, I have to agree with him. Anyway, by the time World of Lies entered this World of Lies, the Berzerker had become a fully fledged death metal project across the board, shedding their grindcore and gabba roots and replacing them with more intricate song structures. This was hinted at on the skullfuck that was Dissimulate, but the songs here have much more room to breathe, for better or worse. That is, okay? For better or worse. If you came to the Berzerker to get your wig split by unseemly levels of musical brutality, you may be slightly disappointed here. I think melody would probably be the wrong word. I'd say scope would be the better option. Don't get me wrong, the bass drums are still distorted gabba kicks, but that's the only hallmark from the past year. Considering this entire thing was recorded in a ridiculously short space of time on a laptop, it sounds massive, so I have nothing but props here. Dr. Francis Gross samples win extra points, as does the surprisingly relaxing doomy outro looper, Farewell. Listening to this album again for the purposes of putting together this video took me all the way back to 2005, where I played this thing pretty much on repeat, just like Dissimulate. Good times, man. So what happened next? The band continued to tour, but outside of Luke and Sam, none of the members on World of Lies would join them. Instead, Matt Wilcock, from the Dissimulate era, and Akakoka, would continue to be the band's touring guitarist. So why on earth didn't they just record an album with this lineup? I will never know. It might have something to do with the fact that Matt had moved from Australia to the UK at this point to join Akakoka full time, but this is merely speculation on my part. Anyway, this move to the UK by Matt had a number of benefits, one of which being that speedy drumming powerhouse David Gray of Akakoka also became a session musician for the Berzerker. There was probably, let's be honest, only a handful of drummers on the planet who could play with enough speed and also be perfectly open to such levels of triggering to work in the Berzerker, right? So Dave Gray was the perfect choice in my opinion, and it was a massive shame that he never appeared on a Berzerker album and only played with the band in a live capacity. I absolutely adore Dave Gray. I'd call him an inspiration, but I don't have a snowflake's chance in hell of ever drumming the way he does. I just put him up there with Nick Barker as one of the greatest drummers of all time. Who knows, maybe one day I'll do an Akakoka video or Voices video or an Antichrist Imperium video. All are amazing bands involving Dave Gray that are well worth looking into. Anyway, let's move on to the next Berzerker record. Animosity came in 2006. Sam Bean doesn't seem to be involved in this album, from what I can see. Instead, it seems Luke worked alone with Jason V, a guy who did half of the guitars on the band's Self-Titled, as well as being a contributor to World of Lies. This album was also mastered by Russ Russell, who, amongst many other artists he has worked with, has done many of the recent Napalm Death albums. I think this mastering job is a contributing factor as to why, for me, Animosity packs more of a punch than World of Lies did. Animosity provided no great step forward from the material presented on World of Lies, let's be honest. Hello, I will say that the riffing is slightly less mournfully melodic than its predecessor, and the programming drums are a little less chunky. They're more of a smack than a thud. It is, however, as a whole, Animosity as a whole, more refined and to the point. It's cut a bit of bloat that came with World of Lies and instead just gets in and fucks you right up. Songs like Heavily Medicated, which we just played on this video, as well as Eye for an Eye and The Cancer, these are just insanely brutal songs. It's kinda like a sister or brother release to World of Lies though, as it is similar in many ways. The production is very similar, there's just the general kind of songwriting, even though these are shorter, sharper, more brutal tracks, it's very similar in that regard. To some, it may just feel like another album being dropped, they're just churning them out, but to me the key difference here between Animosity and World of Lies is that this one doesn't fuck around and is entirely savage as fuck. It's a long way from what made the Berzerker stand out with their debut album, but it's still a unique take on death metal, whichever way you slice the cake. Or corpse. Strangely enough, the band continued to tour with a lineup of Sam Bean, Matt Wilcock and David Gray. Like, what the fuck? Meaning that the folks touring this didn't actually play on the album, with the exception of Luke. And again, it adds to that frustration of why they didn't continue with, the Dissimulate lineup plus Dave from Akakoka. That would have been fucking amazing if that was ever put down on tape. I remember just before this album dropped, the band came to fucking Pontypridd, of all places, in the valleys in it, and I got to meet Sam and Luke in person, which was great because I fucking loved the Berzerker when I was a teenager. I was a bit drunk and probably a bit of an annoying fanboy, but it was great to talk to Luke, and more so with Sam Bean, who seemed far friendlier. Luke was a bit more closed off and reserved, but that's fine, that's what I'm like on most days, so I completely understand. Matt Wilcock was cool as fuck too, and it was amazing to exchange some words with Dave Gray from Akakoka, who made me feel like some sort of industry insider when he told me a new Akakoka album was coming in the next year. The tour has a few support bands, but there's one in particular called Necrosis. Yes, that's Necrosis with 2 Ks, who were super cool guys, and we spent a lot of time drinking with them and arm wrestling and doing stupid shit, which was great. Anyway, let's move on and talk about the final Berzerker record. The Berzerker's final incarnation was, on paper, a promising one. This time, Luke shacked up with Ed Lacey, another one of the guitarists who contributed to both the self-titled and World of Lies albums. On the self-titled, Sam Bean did everything, and then Jason and Ed came in and did additional guitar tracks. On World of Lies, fuck knows who contributed what to that soup of an album. Anyway, so it's Ed and Luke here, right? Live, for the first time, the band was completely fresh and anew. Joining Luke and Ed were a whole slew of newcomers: Damien Palmer on bass, Germ on guitar, and most importantly, not to shit on everyone else, was Todd Hansen on drums. This guy can fucking drum, my friends, an absolute machine. So gone was Dave Gray from Akakoka. The band once had its own drummer again, Todd Hansen. So I'm not sure of the ins and outs, but it seems like Luke's relationship with Uric Records soured somewhat. This is a recurring theme. People seem to get very bitter after dealing with Uric Records, and again, that's something I want to look into without addressing just too much just total bullshit and hearsay. I want to look into why that happens. Anyway, yeah, Luke's relationship with Uric Records deteriorated, and that vitriol and anger found its way into fueling Luke to totally rework the band into something new, as well as giving him the fire to completely go it alone with no label support. Berzerker Industries was born, and with a fully revitalised live band and a stunningly fast and precise new drummer, at least in the live environment, and the constant presence of the Berzerker street team pumping shit out online and on social media, things seemed on an upward slant. However, the Reawakening, the first album away from Uric Records, falls flat on its arse, I am sorry to say. Tracks range from uninspired to just downright horrible. Riffs that were once brutal as fuck or morosely melodic are clumsy and awkward. Case in point, The Deception. The vocals sound like they were recorded in someone's fucking living room, and to be fair, they probably were recorded in someone's fucking living room, but when you record vocals in someone's fucking living room, you don't want the vocals to sound like they were recorded in someone's fucking living room. Whoever mixed this thing should have been shot at birth. Thank holy fuck then for the drums. Toss in a bunch of stale and boring remixes, and you've got the finished product that is the Reawakening. I don't really mean any shade to the people who contributed the remixes either, but they just drag this whole thing out far too long. It's a bit of a task to get through the album as it is, and then you've got these altered versions just to get through at the end, and it's just like, Oh, no, sorry, I'm done. This is going in the bin. It's a shame that such an unrelenting and legendary band went out on such a wet fart of a record, but we can't have it all, right? Kenny et al. Still dropped 4 other massive solid albums, even World of Lies, so it's easy to overlook this one if you are so inclined. Also, seemingly, as if like destiny has worked these things out for you, the Reawakening is also typically incredibly difficult to get a hold of anyway, especially as a physical copy, or even on streaming services. You can still listen to the whole thing on YouTube if you are morbidly curious, or if you're one of the people that actually like this thing. You can check it out there. And it's sad to say that, well, that's it from the Berzerker, at least to date. Luke's reinvented, revigorated lineup toured heavily around the release of the Reawakening, but the band eventually came to a stop, and Luke returned to Australia to reboot a previous career, that of being a photographer. The Berzerker went on permanent hiatus, and that was that. Until many years later. Unfortunately, I have no new material to show you, but around the time of the first coronavirus outbreak, or maybe just before, a flurry of Facebook activity signalled that Luke had reassembled a gang of collaborators. Get the gang back together, Luke, and was indeed working on a new Berzerker album, or new material at least. Promises of another record were made, but as of the time of recording, nothing has materialised. It's been over 2 years since these posts and stuff went down on Facebook, so I won't spend too much time going into who's who from the historical roster who's supposedly involved once more, because nothing exists yet. I figured, however, that it was definitely worth mentioning whilst writing this video that after basically a decade of inactivity, or if not longer, Luke has decided to boot the Berzerker back up again. I'm not sure if it was just out of sheer boredom during the lockdowns. I know the guys did a show in like 2013 or something as like a one-off. Maybe there's other reasons involved, I'm not sure, but until something actually materializes, I will stop now and keep my speculation to a minimum. I will, however, link you to a podcast below where once again an understandably frustrated Sam Bean prophesises that despite his parts being done on the new album, the record will never see the light of day. Now, there's a whole host of reasons to this, and to speculate further would only result in me muddying what Sam has to say. So if that interests you, check out the link in my video description for more information on why this thing might never come out. Rest assured, however, if a new Berzerker comes out and it does materialise, I'll be one of the first in line to get myself a copy, and I'll absolutely talk the arse off it here on Lines in Wax 2 as a bit of a follow-up to this video. So anyway, once again, all of you, thank you for watching. If you have any other extreme artists in a similar vein to the Berzerker that you'd like to recommend or discuss, or anything, actually just fucking write anything, drop me a comment below and let's get a dialogue going. I'm always looking for new and exciting music to check out. That's why I'm here. I hope you enjoyed the video, so stay safe and cheers for watching. Cheers as well to Luke, Kenny, Mate and Sam and Matt and all the gang for the mental heavy music, Jason, Ed and all the boys. Crikey. And as always with these discography videos, I'll let the band play us out. Ta-da, now I'll catch you in the next video.